The novelist Henry James once said, "I find it almost as impossible to conceive that someone other than Shakespeare wrote the plays as to conceive that the man from Stratford did." So he put himself right in the middle, didn't he? What are the main barriers, just to sum up this, that the various sides face? I think that those who support Shakespeare of Stratford do have to explain how a person from a provincial town acquired the immense erudition reflected in the plays. That, after all, is the question that first started the controversy. And in my own view, his relationship with Southampton, the Earl of Southampton, a provincial coming to know a nobleman that well, I think, is something that's bothersome and needs some kind of answer if it can ever be found. Those who believe one of the pretenders wrote the plays, I think, must provide a convincing reason why they would want to conceal their authorship for so long. And it must explain also why the confidence of these pretenders would also want to keep concealing that person's authorship for so long. Those, I think, are the key questions. Well, as I said before, I was not going to give you any definitive answer, which I don't think I've done. But I was going to give you the evidence for Shakespeare of Stratford as we've found it, and the evidence for some of the other major contenders. And so I'm ready to hear what you have to say about this controversy. Well, let me just say this to begin with. During the intermission, Shirley Norton gave me this letter from the New York Times, and in it, it's a person who opposes the Shakespeare-Stratford position, was citing the little quatrain that appears on his tomb. And it has the most famous line in it is, "Cursed be the man who moves my bones." And there's some other lines. And the position of the writer of this letter is that that little bit of doggerel, which was written apparently without any question by the person who's buried there, and if it was, then he was certainly literate, but it does not match in its quality the kind of work that he did in his poems and plays. That's another little bit. Do you have anything to add to that, Shirley? Where are you?
No,
I was
just curious when I saw that.
Yeah, right.
They had mentioned in an editorial previous to that.
Right, yeah. Yes?
But how did they know the person buried there wrote that?
I don't know. But I believe, it's generally believed by most people that the person buried there, I think some of obviously the Anti-Stratfordians wouldn't believe it, because they think that he wouldn't have the capacity to write even something that good, or that poor, whatever you want to think of it. But I don't know what the evidence is, yes.
Well, I'd like to ask, you listed some people who do not believe that Shakespeare wrote it, and what did they know? I mean, how much studying did they do, or was it just, kind of their personal opinion?
I presume it was more a personal opinion based on some of the ideas that I presented. And I think, as I said at the very beginning, that the main one is that this person in Stratford couldn't possibly have acquired the background that's reflected in the plays. I suspect that's the main thing that convinced them. Yes?
Is it generally conceded that all of the Shakespeare plays and sonnets were written by the same person?
No, it is not generally conceded. In fact, there's doubts about the 37th play. What's that? If we had it produced here, the name of it doesn't. Yeah, often people will say that he wrote 36, but even then, it's believed that other people had a part in writing some of it. I think Henry VIII is an example of that, which was one of his very late plays, that other people did work with him or did add things to it. So that is also another question that scholars are constantly.
Then it becomes a little bit like proving that my father is my father.
Yes, I think so. Yes, it does. Are there any other questions or comments? Yes.
I was curious about what you meant by the cipher, and when you referred to Bacon. Was it a notation of some kind, or a means of looking at these?
Donnelly just went to the plays and came out with these ideas that they meant this and this and this according to a certain cipher, and in his books he indicates what the cipher is, just as any cipher does. That it meant something other than what it said on its surface, that there was a hidden meaning in it, and that what you had to do was to find the key, and he believed that he had found the key. And then he just kept going and going, and if he'd stopped when he was ahead, I think it would have been better for his subsequent reputation, but he just went on into what I think was a ridiculous extreme. But it's very complicated, actually, to explain what that cipher is. And even when you look at it, you have to study it very, very hard to figure out what Donnelly is talking about. Yes?
Well, I guess we have to keep open minds, but I often think that knowing his background, whoever would have expected anything of Benjamin Franklin?
Yes, you mentioned that to me, and I think that you make a very good point. Do you want to go ahead a little bit on that?
Well, he couldn't have had a very much in the way of education. He was a 17th child in the family, and this wasn't anything to indicate that he was going to turn out the way he did.
I think probably it's a matter of degree, that perhaps you can explain Franklin's achievements, even though he did have a poor beginning, a little bit better than you can explain Shakespeare's achievements. I think perhaps that's it. But we have many instances of people who are geniuses, who just simply amaze us by what they accomplish. And Franklin is certainly one of them. Yes?
You mentioned that the first doubts about authorship were raised in 1781. Was there anything particular at that time that prompted the sudden speculation?
I think it's the... I don't know of anything specific that caused that to happen. The main thing that happened was in about 1850 when the Bacon was first proposed. But there were other people through those years ahead of time, and one of them was the author of this publication, who began to doubt that Shakespeare of Stratford could have done it. And it's, I think, for some of the reasons that we've been talking about this morning. But I don't know of the specific reason why that was done. Are there any other questions? Yes.
How much stock do you take in the computer work?
Some stock. I think that there is style that is reflected in writing, and style that can be identified. Use of words, for example, tendencies. And I think that computers, because of their ability to analyze vast amounts of data quickly, can do something to determine whether a given person could have written a given piece of work. So I think there is something to it. Well, I thought that we should not conclude a session about Shakespeare without hearing a little Shakespeare. And what I've done, I've taken the most prominent lines that he ever wrote, probably, the to be or not to be speech. And I made a copy of a couple of records of Laurence Olivier as he read these lines in the movie production of Hamlet in 1946. And you will hear music, so it's right from the screen production. And then John Gielgud, who is one of our great Shakespearean performers, did a tour, and he came to Ann Arbor, I believe, in which he read material from Shakespeare. And so we will listen to Laurence Olivier's interpretation of the to be or not to be speech, and then we will listen to John Gielgud's interpretation, and maybe you may have some reactions to that. Then I have a couple of other things from Shakespeare written by John Gielgud that are just simply wonderful examples of the Shakespeare gift. So let's listen to Laurence Olivier first. Let's see now.
Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them, to die, to sleep no more, and by sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh has had. 'Tis a consummation divided to be wished, to die, to sleep, a chance to dream. I dare survive, for in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's conscience, the pangs of despised love, the law's delays, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would furrows bear, to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but at the dread of something after death? The undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all. And thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought. And enterprises of great pith and moment, with this regard their currents turn awry, and lose the name of action.
Troubles, and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns which patient merit of the unworthy take, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin. Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death? The undiscovered country, from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the one, and makes us rather bear those ills we have, than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience doth make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sickly o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith of moment, with this regard, their currents turn awry, and lose the name of action. I but to die, and go we know not where, to lie in cold.
I'm sorry, I went too far. Anyway, that's two different, I get here in the mic, two different interpretations of that famous speech. Any comments on it?
Are you for, do you reject the burden that both of them lack the passion and the distraught Hamlet that Richard Burton's records bring?
I didn't have it. Yeah, I didn't. I saw the, I guess it was the film of Richard Burton doing Hamlet, but I don't have any records, so I didn't. The one I wanted to get was Maurice Evans, and I just couldn't locate the records. But between Olivier and Gielgud, how do you fall? Pardon? You go Olivier. Anybody go Gielgud?
When you hear it, the contrast is so amazing.
Yes. Well, it's two different kinds of situations. I think we have to take that into account. Olivier, you recall in the film, did not actually speak the lines. You could just see his face, and they had been recorded earlier and then played as he was showing various types of expressions. I go with Gielgud. I felt that his phrasing is better, although, as I say, the situations may explain the difference. And I feel that Gielgud gets to the core of the meaning somewhat better than Olivier, although Olivier is very good. I've always had a feeling, though, that his expertise as a Shakespearean actor was somewhat overemphasized. One of the greatest performances I ever saw him perform was in The Entertainer, a movie. That was an absolute classic performance. I was in London once, and I heard a radio production on the BBC of Richard II by John Gielgud, and I think that's the best thing he has ever done. It was just absolutely overwhelming. And I came out on the street, and there I saw John Gielgud walking down the street. And I've always regretted that I didn't run up to him and tell him how much I had enjoyed his performance. I somehow was a little bit reluctant to do that. I think we have time just to hear a little bit. I unfortunately went a little bit too far there. I didn't quick enough to cut it off. But in Measure for Measure, Claudio, when he is sentenced to death, reads some dialogue which reminds you very much of To Be or Not to Be. And then following that is that wonderful passage from Hamlet. These are all written by Gielgud, which ends with the idea, what a piece of work is man. And I think we need to hear that sometimes to go out and face the world that we sometimes have to face. Although some of the other parts of that speech are a little bit more pessimistic. But let's conclude by hearing these two.
Not this sensible warm motion to become a kneaded clod, and an enlightened spirit to bathe in fiery floods, or to reside in thrilling region of thick ribbed ice, to be imprisoned in the viewless winds, and blown with restless violence round about the pendant world, or to be worse than worst of those that lawless and in certain thought imagine howling. 'Tis too horrible. The weariest and most loathed worldly life that age, ache, penury, and imprisonment can lay on nature is a paradise to what we fear of death. I have of late, and wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth, foregone all custom of exercises, and indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory. This most excellent canopy, the air, look you, this brave o'erhanging firmament, this majestical roof fretted with golden fire. Why, it seems no other thing to me than a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors. What a piece of work is a man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable. In action, how like an angel. In apprehension, how like a god. The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. And yet, to me, what is this quintessence of dust?
What a piece of work are men and women, which we all are. I leave you with that thought.